Hey guys, welcome back to another video. This is Troy with Cichlid Bros. In today's video, we are talking about one of the most colorful, common, and relatively peaceful cichlids that you will find out there today. That is the Yellow Lab Cichlid. We'll walk through a full care guide and species profile on this awesome cichlid, so let's dive right in. So the Yellow Lab Cichlid, also known as the Labidochromis caeruleus, is an African cichlid from Lake Malawi, and specifically it is an mbuna. And the first thing you will notice about the Yellow Lab Cichlid is just that bright yellow coloration. It is one of the most beautiful, colorful fish that you'll find in the freshwater hobby, and both the males and the females get that bright yellow coloration that makes them stand out in any tank. Because of that great color, they're in high demand and they're pretty easy to breed, so they're all over the place. Most local fish stores and big box stores will carry them, and they're a pretty inexpensive fish because of that. They'll likely be below $15 depending on how big you get them. The Yellow Lab is an mbuna species which has a reputation of being very aggressive cichlids. However, the Yellow Lab Cichlid is one of the mbuna that's relatively peaceful and can be kept with a wider range of fish, in my opinion, because of that relatively peaceful nature. Of course, they can be feisty like all cichlids, especially if you have a rogue individual or your male and female ratio is off just a bit, or if they're in breeding mode, but for the most part, Yellow Lab cichlids are one of the most peaceful African cichlids you will find. And the max size for Yellow Lab cichlids is only about 4 to 5 inches, so you don't need a massive tank to be able to hold them and keep them long term. However, a lot of times people will elect to overstock their aquarium when it comes to mbuna specifically, because that helps mitigate some of the aggression. Each fish can't target one. It kind of dissipates that aggression within the tank. And within the tank setup, I would definitely recommend a big rockscape, tons of rocks and caves, so that all the mbuna can swim in and out of those caves and really show off that natural behavior. This is an awesome cichlid tank setup from Rift Waters. He had all the Yellow Labs in a tank with a black substrate and a black background with that rockscape in the middle. It's an amazing idea for a Yellow Lab setup if you aren't going to do a mixed mbuna tank setup. And then me and both of my brothers have had Yellow Labs in the past with a variety of other mbuna. This one right here is Quinn's current 75-gallon mbuna tank, and as you can see, there's black substrate again, which I think looks really good with the Yellow Lab. Some dragonstone and rock work there so that there's plenty of nooks and crannies for them to swim in and out of. And in this tank they have some yellowtail ACI and some Johanni, other really common mbuna cichlids. But even though the Yellow Lab is relatively peaceful compared to other mbuna, it can hold its own with most other species, so you can really get a wide range. I think they look great with some of the blue species like Dumasoni, Johanni. They look great with the red zebra, the Kenyai, other cichlids that provide different color patterns that you can mix and match with the yellow, obviously, from the Yellow Lab. When it comes to the minimum tank size, I would say if you just have a breeding group, maybe a 40-gallon breeder is enough. But if you do a 55-gallon tank or larger, I think it starts to become a really good environment for them, especially because you're probably going to be overstocking the tank with other African cichlids. A 75-gallon tank I think is perfect for some of these mbuna species like the Yellow Lab. I would definitely recommend a sand substrate, as many rocks as you can get in the tank. They will probably eat live plants just like most other African cichlids, so you may want to just avoid that altogether. And you could put driftwood in there if you want, although it's not typically what you'll find in most mbuna tanks. And then just have good filtration, maybe a wave maker. Mbuna love to swim in the current, so I always recommend that for African cichlid tanks. And when it comes to their water parameters, African cichlids like a slightly higher pH and hardness level, but they're really adaptable to anything. I would just recommend keeping things consistent versus chasing parameters. When it comes to temperature though, I would say anywhere from 76 degrees to 82 degrees Fahrenheit would be perfect for them. And then keeping no ammonia, no nitrite, and your nitrates below 40 parts per million. When it comes to African cichlids, they do produce a lot of waste, and if you're overstocking your tanks, sometimes those nitrates will creep up fast, so that may require some extra water changes. Just test your water and see what your nitrates are. Try to keep them below 40 parts per million, maybe 20 parts per million if you can, and the Yellow Lab will be happy and healthy and live long term. And when it comes to tank mate options, the Yellow Lab might be the most versatile of all the African cichlids because it can hold its own, but it's not too feisty and aggressive to where it's going to kill everything off in the tank. However, I would always recommend a Lake Malawi and mbuna tank setup first. That would be the ideal environment in terms of the rockscape and the diet that you'll likely be giving the Yellow Lab. But if you expand it into peacocks and haps from Lake Malawi, you may just need a really big tank to be able to do that successfully. Usually the Yellow Labs will be just fine, but getting them their diet specifically can be a challenge in that setup, and we'll talk about that in a second. I do think you can keep them with Central and South American cichlids sometimes, as long as they're not the really big guys that would eat the Yellow Labs, but the Yellow Lab can usually hold its own if you're going to mix and match. A lot of times I just recommend keeping the African cichlids together versus the American cichlids, but if you really wanted to do it, you could probably get away with it. I would definitely stay away from some of the smallest tetras and barbs, but there are some community fish that could potentially go with the Yellow Lab. If you have a really big tank, things like your silver dollars and bala sharks probably would be okay. They'll definitely be fine with some of your bottom dwellers like clown loaches, plecos, and other catfish. Some corridoras maybe, as long as they're big enough, but just in general I would recommend an mbuna tank on its own. I think it's very rewarding with tons of color, personality, activity, and behaviors that you'll be able to witness in that tank. But if you're trying to expand it into other species, maybe the peacocks and haps, but we'll talk about why that can be tricky with the diet. So the Yellow Lab, just like other mbuna species, does require a higher vegetable-based diet, so spirulina flakes or any types of vegetables that you can give the mbuna will keep them much healthier. But if you're feeding too much protein like you would give to peacocks and haps or some of your American cichlids, it can lead to health issues like Malawi bloat, and just in general they don't need constant protein like some of your other fish. So if you do have peacocks and haps in the tank, it can be tricky to target feed your mbuna and also give enough protein to the big guys. But again, that's why I would usually recommend just mbuna with the Yellow Lab. But if you're going to keep them with some other fish, just keep that in mind that you do need to provide a high vegetable-based diet, and I'll leave links to that down in the description below. Another great thing about the Yellow Lab is that they're really easy to breed. All you need is a mix of males and females and they will just go at it. And they are mouth brooders, meaning the female will hold the eggs in their mouth until they hatch into fry. They'll also keep the fry in the mouth for a while until they're free swimming and a little bigger. And if you're trying to breed them, I would recommend maybe one male to 3 or 4 females in the tank, and you'll usually get a couple females holding right away. They're really quick breeders, and you can mainly tell them apart based on the dorsal fin color, with the male having the darker black throughout its fins. The females will usually have a little bit of egg spots on their fins, and that's how you can tell them apart. You could also just see when the females are holding, it looks like they have a mouthful of food, but once they are ready, they will spit out the babies, and you'll have tons of Yellow Labs all throughout your tank. It's a really interesting process to go through, and it's great with the Yellow Lab because they're so easy to breed. It is perfect for beginners that are maybe wanting to experience that process for the first time, or have breeding in their tank without too much aggression, because other cichlids, when they're breeding, become terrors, but the Yellow Labs are still relatively peaceful. In summary, the Yellow Lab is one of the most colorful cichlids you will find out there. It is also very common, inexpensive, has so much activity. The behaviors are really interesting when you have a really good rockscape. You don't have to have a massive tank to keep them, just have a 55-gallon or larger and you're great. They should be a great option for beginners or advanced aquarists alike, so I would definitely recommend the Yellow Lab Cichlid. Absolutely love them, and if you have any questions about the Yellow Lab, leave that down in the comment section below. We're always happy to help. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.